Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cornelius Seed Podcast. I'm your host Juan, and today I'm joined by Craig Alleman, our lead agronomist. Today we're going to kick things off talking about a real-world call about some corn-on-corn fields showing yellowing streaks. From there, we're going to talk through the ugly stage of continuous corn, why residue and root health matter, and how to stay ahead using growing degree units, or as we know them, GDUs. Craig's also going to share some tips on ideal planting depth and moisture consistency and what to look for when scouting for insect pressure. There's a lot here going on as a lot of the country already has corn at different stages, while there's still some corn up in our northern footprint going into the ground. So without further ado, let's get into it. But anyways, welcome, Craig.
Hey, good morning, Juan.
What you and I were talking, I think it was yesterday, you mentioned a recent call you got about some emerged corn that there was a corn on corn situation. And can you talk a little bit about that, what that call was about and what you saw? And
Yeah, anybody that has grown continuous corn knows that there's always we call it the ugly stage that you go through, and that could be yellowing of the corn, and usually it's patchy and it's just ugly. And so that's what I was looking at there yesterday, that had a good stand. This corn went in that week after April, but there were definitely streaks where it was very yellow and versus streaks that looked just fine. And when we were digging out there, went to the yellow stuff first, and as I carefully dug down through to see what I was going to look at, anytime you see an above ground issue with any crop, but discoloration or whatever it may be, my first thing that I want to do is see what is going on underneath the surface, what's going on with the roots. So we're looking for things like compaction and different things at that point in time, because your above ground symptoms usually something that, due to something that's going on underneath the surface. You could have pancake roots with soybeans that are just growing flat, and you might see a potash deficiency on the leaf, for instance. Well, it's not that the soil's potash deficient, it's that the roots aren't getting to the potash. As I was digging down there yesterday, first in that yellow stuff, I was just getting a really heavy amount of residue that I was digging through. And the customer had done a great job managing their residue. They had it sized down really small. They really couldn't do much better. But when you run these combines and you run a ripper through after you ran a combine, it's not going to do a perfect job of spreading that residue out. There's always going to be some heavy areas, and that ripper's just not going to get rid of it all. And I'm sure that's what we were seeing in those streaked areas, heavy residue right behind the combine that didn't get completely spread out. And then that corn was trying to grow up through that. And the issue there is the yellowing is going to be a nitrogen deficiency, is what we're seeing. And the microbes that are breaking down that residue are using the nitrogen as a food source. So the nitrogen that's sitting there available to that plant, they're using a lot of it to help them break down that residue. And then eventually that'll be released back out, and the corn roots will grow down through that residue and get to other available nitrogen, and then they'll green back up and get through that, what we call that ugly stage. Wasn't really anything wrong. What I was really after is the health of the roots, and the roots were very white. There was no brown discoloration or anything that we would see with a Pythium or Rhizoctonia or Fusarium, any of the water molds that we see this time of the year, the soil-borne fungal diseases.
okay, I appreciate that. I thought that was pretty interesting. GDUs, I've seen it as it's known as growing degree units, or GDDs, growing degree days. How can we use that as a tool, and what can we do with that information?
Yeah, GDUs or growing degree units or growing degree days, it's the same thing. It's just what different people have called them through the years, but it's just a temperature. We're just a way to measure temperature and then relate that back to how the crop is developing, or maybe when an insect hatches. There's a lot of different ways that we apply that. Again, it just puts a little science behind a time span. So we know corn can emerge like this last planting window. It can emerge in 5 days because the temperatures are warmer. And then that stuff we planted earlier might be 3 weeks before it comes out of the ground. And that's based on, again, on temperature. So with growing, to calculate that, we use you take the high plus the low of the day, Divide that by 2 and subtract 50. That's just the simple calculation. Now, the high, they stop at 86. Basically, what they're saying is that above 86 degrees, and that crop's not going to grow any faster, maybe slow down. And then below 50, the same thing. The crop's really not going to be growing. If we get below 50, it's going to shut down. That gives us a growing degree units per day or growing degree days. We know then it takes X growing degree days to get corn to emerge, or when we've had X growing degree days since the season has started, that may be when the rootworm larva will hatch out. Okay. And some of us know when the fireflies start flying, that's about the time frame that the rootworm larvae come out. Fireflies hatch and come out in a certain amount of growing degree days. So it's just a little bit of a scientific method to determine when we're going to hit certain growth stage.
Okay. I was talking to one of the district sales managers, and he wanted you to also touch base on like how your planting depth will also, how that ties into emergence.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. Now, with corn, and again, everybody has their own personal favorite depth that they like to plant. But generally speaking, with corn, that 2 inches is a good depth to try to hit. I personally, on a normal year where I've got adequate moisture at that depth, because that's important. You got to chase that moisture. If you don't want to set that seed out there in dry dirt, because you don't know when you're going to get the rain and get it to come out of the ground. So you want to get it placed in good moisture and not just barely in moisture, because that layer may dry and move down on you before it soaks up enough water to germinate. So you want to get it in decent moisture. I shoot for 2.25. I think anywhere from that 2 to 2 3/4, 3 inches is a good depth. But I shoot for 2.25 because I want to, even after that soil has settled down after that first rain, I still want to be a couple inches deep. And so that's just my personal opinion on it. But you are going to get, if you think about it, you're going to get a much more consistent temperature if you get it down at a deeper depth. Some guys will go 1.5 inches. I think that's really, you're getting borderline on it if you're deep enough. You do need to get deep enough to where your nodal roots, when they begin to set, they're a little bit deeper and can anchor that plant down. If you get too shallow, I've seen accidental planting at 3/4 inch, and you can get what's called a shallow root syndrome. Those nodal roots, when they start coming out, are going to be basically at the surface, and if they won't grow in dry soil. So if we get dry, warm winds and bake that upper surface, those nodal roots just aren't going to grow, and then they're not going to anchor that plant. And that primary root system is not very deep to be able to help anchor that plant. Those are some of the things we worry about. But in earlier planting, probably the question is that planting depth, and make sure you get a consistent temperature. And that is really important on some of that earlier planting. You get it. University of Minnesota has done studies years and years ago, of course, up there where it's much colder, and that deeper depth on earlier planting to get that consistent temperature is pretty important for emerging evenly. So I think that's the root of that question.
Okay, no, definitely. So, I want to touch base on replant. We'll circle back to it again specifically, but let's say for whatever reason, someone's in a replant situation right now and they're planting again. Now we're later in the season. Are they going to want to go shallower planting depth to get out sooner, or is it a case by case and soil by soil kind of situation?
No, your planting depth should not change. That wanting to make sure you get into moisture, wanting to make sure you have a consistent temperature so that you emerge evenly, making sure that when those nodal roots come out on corn, they're a little bit deeper and are going to anchor better and be in moisture. Those things won't change depending on your planting dates.
Okay.
That depth is something that I certainly wouldn't change. And when we started, we've had a lot of wind. It's just been windier than normal this spring in Western Illinois, and our surface was really dry. So we chased moisture. So I started out at that 2.25 inch planting depth, and right away we that pause that planter and get out
and
yeah,
measure. We butchered that last time on the last episode, by the way. I caught an earful from Janie in marketing. She said, "Hey, you don't want to do that."
well,
We joke about it, but sometimes I know folks will see it in every industry. You'll come up with some catchy to hopefully make it memorable. And our goal behind that is it's really important, right? So that pausing and digging and measuring just to check that depth. But sorry, interrupt you there. That's funny. You reminded me about that.
I suppose we have to have marketing people.
Yeah.
That's yeah, but anyway, I had my 2¼ inch depth, the planter set there, but we got down, and after the end rows and that first pass, you're into the field conditions, did some digging, and I was in moisture, but I was barely in moisture. We probably started out 2½, 2¾ inch is what we were planting depth on corn, and on beans, 1.5 on beans is plenty good, 1 to 1.5 depending on moisture, and we were probably the same way with beans. We were probably 2.5 inches deep. And you got to make sure that you're in that moisture.
Okay. Thank you for that. But I also want to touch base on the folks that may have been affected by the cold spell and how long they should wait as they're evaluating whether or not they should replant.
When we go out there and we think about replant in general, we're really looking at planting dates. So what was the planting date, the initial planting date of the field? And then if we did replant, what can the expected yield be? Now, I carry around, Purdue has a corn soybean guide. I carry that around with me. Iowa State, Purdue's is combined in one. Iowa State has one for corn, one for beans. University of Wisconsin has some really good material on replant soybeans in particular that Sean Connolly has worked with. And so any of those things can be good references. But I got my Iowa State book sitting here on my desk open. And for instance, they're saying that 100% yield potential on corn is 35,000 plants planted between April 20th and May 5th. That's their studies over time. In the state of Iowa, that's your magic window for planting corn, and that's your magic population range according to Iowa State. But if we were sitting here today, let's say we had a 20,000 plant stand. So if that 20,000 plants were planted in that magical window of April 20th to May 5th, that's still an 89% yield potential. All right. So if we have a field that is in question and we're thinking about replanting it today, if we go back and plant that 35,000, which they're saying is the best population range, if we planted that after May 15th, or so in their window, it's a May 15th to May 25th. They're saying 35,000 plants is an 87% yield potential. So if we have 20 planted in the earlier window, we've got 2% more yield potential than if we tore it up and replanted it today. So those are the decisions that we make.
Okay. Like you said, you've said this lots of times, is every operation is different and everybody's got different input costs. At the end of the day, it's that individual decision, but just making sure you evaluate some of those studies and even your own personal past experience to help you make that decision. So on corn, it sounds like for the most part, the folks that are at V3 stage or getting to V3 soon, they can be scouting for insect damage. And are we talking, you look at root, you look for rootworm issues or leaf feeding, corn borers?
When you're scouting a crop in general, you're looking for issues. You may be looking at this time of the year emergence issues. You may be looking discoloration, and again, when you see discoloration, you need to get down there and dig the roots and see if you've got what kind of an issue you might have. You might start seeing some yellowing spots. Stunted corn might be a grape collapsus feeding on the roots, but cutworm is big at this time of the year, and we have had some cutworm flights. Iowa State does a moth monitoring traps across the state, and they send alerts out. In alfalfa, we've had pretty heavy alfalfa weevils. Also, it's usually end of May, 1st of June, based on growing degree units. But when you see those fireflies coming out at night, that's generally when our rootworm larvae are hatching. They're going to start feeding. So Mid-June's good time frame to dig some roots and see how your rootworm prevention program is working, really. So you're trying to see how heavy a feeding you have out there, see if your insecticide's working, or see if your traded corn is working. May give you an idea if you're going to need to throw a insecticide in with your fungicide at that R1 stage to prevent silk clipping and things like that. But always scouting is just, you need to be prepared for anything you see out there, and you're just looking for problems. You might be looking for spacing, emergence, evenness of your emergence, see if you have a planter issue that way, making sure all your rows are even, things like that. Trace that back to something you can improve for next year. But you kind of go out there with an open mind and look for just any issues that you might have.
That's a good point. I like it, tying it back to that. There's some of them where there's not a whole lot you can do if you had some skips here or there and whatnot. But you could, like you said, you can take those opportunities as how can you address the equipment and what improvements you can make. That some of them are just a tweak here or there and some elbow grease that may not require a whole lot of investment. I feel like we've definitely covered a lot on this podcast. Is there anything that we missed that you want to make sure we highlight to the next one?
I think we covered it pretty good.
Well, folks, there you have it. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you picked up something useful today. As always, keep your eyes on the crop and trust your gut while you're in the field. If you're seeing anything weird out there or just want to bounce around some ideas, please don't hesitate to reach out. You know where to find us on really most of the socials. Just look up Planet Profit or Cornelius Seed. Until the next time, take care and happy scouting.